So I'm just going to recap briefly, and maybe Clay will hear some more of the words this time. Babson's Landing has recently experienced very seriously high turbidity levels. They look episodic in nature, and they interestingly weren't detected downstream. So it couldn't have been an event of a very long duration, or eventually the particles would have made their way downstream during a sampling period to be detected. Now you know why, the advantage of having a sensor sitting in the water all the time that continuously measures turbidity. It would have helped us understand this a little better. Now, there have been other times in the past where high values were detected at both of these sites for an extended period of time. One of the cool things that you can do here on the website is zoom in. So I'm going to do that here. And you can see that we had elevated values at Pireway and Babson at the same time. They were tracking together. That happened back in 2017.
Was that Matthew by chance? Hurricane Matthew?
Okay, so to answer that question, one of the things you can do is click on the rain trend graph. And this may not work because we have a big rain data gap in here. I'm just going to click on the daily rain. Yeah, sorry about this. Sometimes some of our data sites go down and we can't get rain data. So we're missing for that period of time. Anybody remember when, well, wait a minute. I think I can go down to Highway 9. Yeah, okay.
I think Matthew was fall of 2016.
Yeah, so there was a really big event in here.
We didn't have a hurricane in the fall of 2017. I only know because that was my first year as riverkeeper, and I praised the hurricane gods. We did have a storm, but we didn't have a major storm like the other years.
Oh,
I think it was
okay.
Irma.
Okay, we had some biggie thing here in August 24th of 2017.
That's Irma, I think.
Okay, so I'm gonna go back here, and so August 24th of 20.
Well, you said August 24th. That's a little early for Irma. Irma hit August 30th through September 12th.
In any event, that's after that period. This period of high turbidity, you know, it kind of concluded here in late summer of 2017, with the peak being in February of 2017. I would have to go back to the notes. We write up a little report after each sampling event, and my notes would say something. I probably, Kara, were you working at the time of this?
Yeah.
Okay. I probably would have sent an email to you and Christine saying, do you have a clue what's going on here? So this is like the winter of 2017. And one thing I like to check right away when you have a situation like that is what where'd the water come from? And a lot of times you can tell that by looking at the conductivity of the water. So I'm just going to jump in here and look at the conductivity of the water. Okay, so I switched to conductivity data, and I'm looking in the winter of 2017, and there was nothing remarkable there. Notice that we did have very high conductivity in this period, some of which is when we had the high turbidity. You know, I'm going to show you one more thing you can do with the data here. And that's we can look at the turbidity and the conductivity at the same time. Okay, so I'm going to turn on this is the conductivity. There's those high values. I'm going to turn on the turbidity, and I have to click Babson's turbidity to get that data. Okay, so some of the high blue dots coincide with some of these super high turbidity, but not every sample collected during the high turbidity period had high conductivity. Wait a minute, I think I said that backwards. Some of the high conductivity samples had high turbidity, but not all of them had high turbidity. So, put Kara on the hot seat here. Do you know of anything going on up in the watershed that could account for these super high turbidity and high conductivity values?
So above Babson's, Juniper Creek enters the Waccamaw. And there are some community members who have expressed a lot of concern about Juniper Creek because it, yeah, if you pull your map up, it might show it. There are a lot of CAFOs around Juniper Creek. Yeah, so, and another thing that we see at Babson's a lot that we don't typically see at Pireway is nutrients, which is another big indicator that it could be CAFO pollution. So that's kind of what we're thinking might be part of it. And I know that during I think it was in 2017 when we saw a lot of those issues with the turbidity being really high, I had reached out to Doug Smith, who was our volunteer water quality monitor at the time. And he had said that there had been some timber activities going on. So that could definitely contribute to the high turbidity. But that is an area that through our Pure Farms, Pure Waters campaign with Waterkeeper Alliance that we are investigating because there are a lot of CAFOs in there. They're kind of hard to see when you're that zoomed out, but if you ever want to look and see where CAFOs are, if you zoom in and you see a bright pink pond like Susan to, yep, I'm pointing at it like you can see what I'm pointing at. Right there, yep, that one right there is a concentrated animal feeding operation, and that is actually one of the ones that I monitor pretty regularly, and there have been violations at that one. So that Leonard Branch runs right into a ditch, which comes into the Waccamaw eventually.
Wow.
Yeah, so, yeah, and you can see it comes into Juniper Creek, and then Juniper Creek comes to the Waccamaw. So, yeah, there are.
Carol, what is that? I didn't understand. What did you say that path is?
Say that again, Clay.
that round brown patch, what'd you say that is?
The round brown
there.
patch is the spray field. So that's where they spray the sludge. Well, not the sludge, but the liquid waste. And we have seen Leonard Branch turn bright pink because they're not supposed to spray when it's raining. They aren't supposed to spray when the wind's up, and they're not supposed to spray when there is weather coming. But they're not enforced unless we complain. So I would definitely say that CAFOs, there's another one off to the further, Susan, you were scrolling the right way. Yep, it's not as pink, it's up in the left corner, but you see, yep, right near your cursor. That is also a hog farm right there. So they are peppered throughout, and I can send along a link to a map that has all the little CAFO farms marked in North Carolina, and you can look at what our watershed looks like. So, yep, that is a big pond of pig poop. Lovely.
I can't believe I can zoom in this much.
Isn't that cool?
I didn't realize this.
Yeah.
So this is Dock Road. It says Dock. Well, that's probably not. It's not Old Dock Road.
Yeah, it's
a different Dock Road.
Yeah. There are lots of dock and old dock, and there's a Reeves Ferry just about every 20 miles down the river, it seems. But yeah, there are a lot, and there is the Green Swamp Preserve, but unfortunately that filtration is out further than our hog farms, and we share that with the Cape Fear. So we don't get all the benefits of Green Swamp Preserve. It's right on the line of our watersheds.
That's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We're lucky we don't have nearly as many CAFOs as some of the other watersheds in North Carolina, but we do have them. There's one right over the state line from where I live. It's actually called State Line Farm because it's that close to the state line. And it filters into Camp Swamp, Camp Branch Swamp, I think.
Kara, do you know if the number of hog farms are decreasing or increasing? What's the trend?
They are holding steady because they aren't approving any more at the moment. And that's something that we're working on with the legislature in North Carolina to make sure that the general permit regulates that and keeps them lower, hopefully.
Yes.
Well, so I promised that we were going to take a peek at your bacteria data, because that would definitely be a concern if hog waste is getting in the river. Is it causing the fecal bacteria numbers to get unacceptably high? And there have been times here at Babson's. So here's one in 2017, here's one in 2018, and one recently last May that went over the DHEC water quality criteria. Again, I don't know what the Diener criteria is. I think it might be.
They do not have one for E. coli. They are still on fecal coliform. So in North Carolina, when we evaluate based on E. coli, we use the EPA standard of 235.
And that's the standard that EPA recommended everybody use. So DHEC's a bit out of step, even though they adopted the E. coli in using 349 rather than 235. And I think they did that just to maintain continuity with the prior fecal coliform data set. They didn't want sites that hadn't been showing up as impaired to suddenly show up as impaired when the transition from fecal coliform E. coli was made. So, you know, one thing we could do is check that one over there, May 29th. Was there rain then? Because I know we had rain data in there. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit here. And that's that high number on May 29th. So yeah, on May 28th, we reported 2.82 inches of rain. And there had been a big rain event back here as well. So that was in May. So this could have been, that high value could have been associated with the rain that fell here. All right, so let's go back here and now let's look at Piraway. You know, in this case, none of the samples collected at Piraway have ever gone over even the EPA threshold. So there's a bigger problem at Babson's than at Piraway. So what happens to the bacteria after it gets in the river? Well, some of it could die from exposure to sunlight. Some of it could get eaten, consumed. Some of it can stick to particles and settle to the bottom. And that's why it may never have made its way down to Piraway, may never survive the transit from Babson's to Piraway. Or we don't sample frequently enough to pick up the downstream transport of the bacteria. So, Clay, I think in a nutshell, that's the major pollution concerns that we've been seeing at these two sites. I think there's some other interesting chemistry type things that we observe, and I'll just briefly show you them. This time I'm going to compare those two sites with the rest of the river. So we'll start off looking at the conductivity. This will take a while. I just requested a lot of data. So here are bar graphs that show the mean value of conductivity, and they're color coded. The really low values are in blue, intermediate are in lighter blue, grading into moderate in orange. I don't know why that one's black. That's weird.
Salty.
97. That should have been orange. I don't know what happened there. These guys really stand out. That has always interested me, how much lower these two sites in North Carolina are from all the other sites downstream in the river. I think
I think it's a good monitoring team.
I think Clay is taking credit for the good water quality, the low conductivity.
Yeah, but you know, Clay, you've got a lot of feedback. I wonder if that's part of the problem. I don't know how you would get feedback. But anyway, looking on the map, as you move downstream, there's a downstream increase in the conductivity. I think that may come from groundwater input and contributions from some of the tributaries. I guess I can't move this thing around. There's a big tributary called Buck Creek that's right in here that has very high conductivity water. I like looking at these box plots. I'm going to switch to a little more expanded mode to show you how the 50% of the data lie within the boxes, how the boxes increase as you get further downstream. The position of the boxes increases as you get further downstream. But there's something very, very different about Babson's and Pireway than all the rest of the sites downstream. I don't know if it's because there's less of a groundwater contribution or the influence of Buck Creek that discharges right here between Pireway and Highway 9.
I'm back on. I actually dialed in and I muted my computer audio. Can y'all hear me now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. It's
Oh,
excellent.
okay. I don't know if it has any bearing or not, Dr. Susan, but you know, Babson, right there on the banks, the gentleman that owns that property, you know, raises dogs, and so there's dog cages that probably have anywhere from 3 to 4 dogs there, caged dogs. I think these are hunting dogs that he raises, and whether that would make any difference or not, I don't know, because eventually, you know, all of that would seep into the river, and that is actually upstream from, you know, upstream by, you know, 50 yards upstream from where we get our samples.
Yeah, even further, wait a minute. Say exactly where this is again.
This is Babson.
Oh, at Babson's. Okay.
So between the landing where we gather our samples and the bridge that goes across the river, there's several dog pens that have, I would guess, 3 to 4, maybe five animals at any time in those pens, and I suspect that, you know, when he washes them out, you know, it's eventually going to end up in the river.
Yeah, and I have been there during heavy rainstorms, and it kind of flows off of his property and straight down into the landing. So that there could be some input there that could cause, yeah, right there in those trees, Susan, is where the dog, kind of in between that back barn.
The long orange barn.
Yep, right in
sort
there.
Of, yeah, right in there.
Under the trees.
That still doesn't explain why this conductivity is so incredibly low.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of these conductivity numbers at Babson's are incredible. This is like hard to purify water to this level to have such low conductivity. That's pretty impressive.
Thank you.
Look at that number, 41.62. It's hard to
What
keep
would,
water that pure.
Kara, just for comparison, what was our number yesterday? Do you have that handy?
I do. Give me just a second.
Because, you know, yesterday was the first time we were back on the ground.
Yesterday at Babson's, it was about 53 microsiemens per centimeters.
Okay, so that's going to put you right up in here, which is going to be on the low side. And I can even scroll up here, look at Babson's, and see that 53 is just a little above the 10th percentile. So that's a relatively low number that you got this week. And I think it's because we've had a lot of rain recently, like all summer long, really.
Yeah.
So just continuing on with the really unusual chemistry that's present, and this may be totally natural, at Babson's and Pireway, look at how low the pHs are over there. So that's partly because the conductivity is low, so there's very little bicarbonate in the water to cause an alkaline pH. So instead, look at these pHs are way below neutral. Neutral is 7. So the water quality criteria for the Waccamaw that DHEC is set up is you're not supposed to go any lower than 5. And look at all these values at Babson's that have been below 5. Even Pireway has been below 5. In comparison, the other sites have seen relatively few cases of values below 5. But at Babson's, even the 25th percentile is below 5. So what's the problem with low pH? Animals like mussels have a hard time surviving in water that is that acidic. So, you know, where's the acid coming from? I think it's partly from the decay of vegetation. And that's why I like to look at the oxygen levels. So this is the oxygen saturation. Anything below 100% means that there's some kind of deficiency of oxygen at the sampling site. Every single one of the samples is at Babson's has been oxygen deficient. When you get below 60, that usually means you're stressing any animals like fish that need oxygen to survive. So a great deal of these data fall below 60. And that means that a lot of acid is being released in using up the oxygen. Organisms that decompose the organic matter, like the dead leaves, dead twigs, the dissolved material that's coming out of the swamp and making it tea-colored, that decays. All of that uses up oxygen. And that's why these saturation levels are so low. This 20% means that only 20% of the oxygen that should naturally be present from communication with the atmosphere was present here on this day, July 10th, 2013. And then we can look at Pireway. Those numbers are similarly quite low. I'll go back and compare them to the other sites on the river. And in this case, the other sites on the river have seen as much, if not more, very low oxygen saturations. except for Waccamaw. So what's unique about Babson's and Pireway seems to be coming from the conductivity, the very low conductivity, rather than something uniquely low about the oxygen. So that's a little natural background on what makes those two sites different. And then, of course, we spent quite a bit of time talking about the pollution history in the turbidity and the E. coli.
Susan, have those two sites always been different the whole time you've been monitoring, or has there been any trend over time and they're becoming more or less different? Or are they just
Yeah.
like stably different over years?
Yeah, we can answer that question by overlaying all of the data. Now we're kind of burying things, but one thing I have noticed in the data is that certainly since 2013, the conductivity values have decreased at almost every single monitoring site. And I think this is related to increased rainfall, that we were in a period of intense drought from about 2009 to 2013, most recent drought. And after that drought let up, I'll just zoom in here a little better. There's been a pronounced decline after 2013, a pronounced decline in conductivity, maybe until here. But then we pick way back up again this summer when we've had rain, 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 rain. So going back to your question, I'm going to undo the South Carolina sites. It's a little slow because there's a lot of data. And it looks like the sampling at the North Carolina site started at 2013. So we kind of lose some of the contrast from the drought. So sampling started at the North Carolina sites right at the end of the drought. So you can kind of see there's a bit of a decline, particularly this summer. You know, kind of started up here around 75-ish and then has drifted down to 50. That's a big decrease. So I think this change has been picked up across the river. I think it's related to an increase in rainfall. I don't know if that's a climate change thing, but it's been a long-term return to rainy conditions after the drought of 2009 to 2012.
Well, it's Clay again. Dr. Susan, is this this information, is it worthy of additional investigation, or what do we do with this stuff?
Yeah, I'm sorry, that drought went from about 2000 to 2012. What do we do with all of this stuff? Well, when we see those really high turbidity and E. coli values, I reach out to Kara. And from what I was hearing her tell us today is that she has gotten all involved in CAFO monitoring that is a likely source of those pollution problems. So I think our continuing to report these downstream pollution detections is important to her work. Am I getting that right, Kara?
Unfortunately, Kara had to hop off for another meeting, but
Oh, okay.
I think you described it very well.
Yeah, so Clay, I think she's found these data really helpful. Now, about the longer
Well, let me, go ahead.
yeah, about the longer term trends, I'll tell you that I got a lot more interested in the data when we were in the drought phase as compared to good rainfall phase. There seems to be less concern, but you don't know if you're in a drought or normal or even too much and creating flooding unless you do this long-term monitoring.
Well, you know, one thing that Christine and I talked about over a couple of years ago about, you know, taking a canoe trip down from one landing to the other, or some section of the river, and you know, taking the equipment with us, and you know, stopping every so often and you know, marking where we are and doing our sampling and so forth. I know that would certainly be far more complicated than our normal monitoring at a permanent site would be. But would you see any value to that exercise?
Yeah, I saw so much value in it that I've done that myself a number of times, not by canoe, but what I've done is within a single day, I've driven starting at Lake Waccamaw and stopped at every single landing that I could get to and made water quality measurements just to try to understand what are the differences from place to place on a given day. So I went all the way down to the end of the river in Winyah Bay in one day. And I did that a couple of times when things were in flood stage, when they were in drought stage, intermediate, to try to get a sense of what those differences were. And I think I did that in the time before the county put sensors in at a couple of places, continuous sensors at a couple of places. And I think they did that in part because of what I was able to show with that data set. So yeah, I think it's such a good idea that I went and did it myself. But I did it, you know, this might be like 20 years ago that I did that.
Well, I mean, we said Christine and I had the idea, and then I came up and had to have knee surgery, so we kept putting it off and never really got back to it. But I would think that Carol would be interested, and I'd certainly like to participate if we could, you know, if we could get everything together that we needed. And like I said, we'd have to figure a way to kind of mark our location each sampling site, and figure out how many data points we're gonna, how many sampling sites we're gonna do in a certain section.
Yeah, and you're
I
not
think
going to be able to cover very much ground in one day. So That's the problem. You know, what you're proposing to do reminds me of something that I heard Victoria, I was at the National Water Quality Monitoring Conference, and someone was giving a presentation. I think it was in Georgia, the Georgia Volunteer Monitoring, that they went out and did like Clay describes, and they were able to pick up illicit discharges because they were in parts of the river that, you know, didn't normally get sampled, but they could get up real close to where tributaries were discharging into the river, you know, out in the middle of nowhere. And they were picking up discharges of pollutants. And the only way to do that was to go out by boat and get to these identifiable places where the little creeks were discharging. So Clay, if you could do something like that and maybe try to time it to like a day after a big rain event, you might identify a lot of things that we haven't been able to detect with our volunteer monitoring sampling design.
Well, I agree with you. And one thing that might be good as well is if you or Kara, through your analysis of the data, could say, here's the best section of the river to do that on, as
Yeah.
far as maybe, you know, between two monitoring sites and that type of thing.
Yeah, well, it looks like one's already been identified between Parway and Babson's and between the lake and Babson's.
Uh-huh.
But those are
Okay.
tough because of all the down trees. I don't know if it's canoeable.
Well, I believe that I think it was it last year or year before that the county, Columbus County, sponsored a project to clear out sections, and I think they went all the way from Waccamaw down to Babson, I believe. Well, it was at least the portion in Columbus County, and because I remember when we would go out, they were parking one of the barges with the lifts and the equipment and all that stuff, so that they could cut out some of these, I guess they called them snags,
Yeah,
and do whatever they did with them, put them over, you know, put them up on the shore, or I don't believe they carried them back with them, but that was a pretty concentrated effort. It seemed like it went for several months, and this is back when Doug Smith and I were doing the monitoring. We would see where they parked the equipment at Babson every time.
yeah, well, we haven't had a storm event, so maybe it's still clear.
Could be. Well, let me, if you want to mention it to Kara, and I can mention it to her, we can see what we can work up.
All right.
Might even develop a flotilla of people.
Yeah,
That sounds like a fun scientific adventure.
yeah, as
Yeah.
long as you don't send your equipment for a swim.
Well, we'd have to. Yeah, it's a good point, and we'd have to, you know, certainly design considerations for that. You know, how we would protect the equipment along the way.
That's a very interesting idea, and we'll have to follow up on that.
Yeah,
I want to make sure I'm part of the scientific expedition party.
There you go. Yeah.
Mm.
And we'd
It
have
might
to
get a
have,
lot of interest that people would enjoy doing that.
we just have to have somebody that's listening for banjo music along the way.
Yeah, yeah.
A
Up
lookout.
there. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I just want to take a moment. We've been talking for an hour, and I've learned a lot of great stuff by listening to you all. This was sort of an informal conversation with Susan, and we will have a more formal data conference next month. And I just want to take a minute and check in with you all and see if there's anything that maybe Susan mentioned today or didn't get to talk about that you'd like to hear more about next month in a more formal way.
I would like to hear more about comparing, this is Julie, the Waccamaw, Lake Waccamaw to the river. And how does the data compare? You would think that it might be pure or, have greater oxygen levels and all of that, but I think that would be interesting to see what happens as the water goes down.
Yeah, well, as I understand it, very little of the river water is comprised of water from the lake. So most of the headwaters in the river are coming from the swamps, like white swamp, green swamp, and not from the lake. So they're almost two completely separate systems. Have you ever been, well, you sample at the dam, so you can see how much water is flowing over the dam into the river. It's not that much.
True. But
so I could certainly compare and contrast the lake to the river, because they are very different from each other. But I don't know that the lake represents an explanation for some of the things we see downstream in the river. It's just not that much of a contributor.
That's a good answer.
But what's going on in the lake is very interesting and very different from the river. And I'd be happy to do that contrast. Even your sampling site at Canal Cove is very much like the river, whereas the dam site and Maple Street are in the lake proper, and they look very different from Canal Cove.
It's because Canal Cove, we don't have a tributary going into the lake, but we sample right beside it, but it's right where we have drainage and discharge from farms, big farms and other farms. And
yeah, but it's still in that dead end, like wetland setting that is an awful lot like the river.
Yes.
Cypress swamp type setting.
And there is some diversity of our sample sites, like Starrett Swamp, and then at the southern end, the water becomes brackish. So we maybe could go over how all the different waters we're seeing a lot as we sample down north to south or south to north. That could be something to talk about, for sure. And I think Rosemary has a question.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm sorry I got in a little bit late today, but I just wanted to mention something that is definitely related to water quality that's happening here at Lake Waccamaw that I think we could really use the support of the Riverkeeper group to help us with. And that is this past Tuesday night, our town council agreed to consider a tree preservation ordinance on the north side, focused on the north side of the lake where we have our limestone shelf, and to try to dissuade erosion and that sort of thing. And I I wanted you folks to know that and could really use some support when it comes to time for us to consider something, and your knowledge and expertise about that shelf and how, you know, important it is to preserving the water quality in the lake. So I just wanted to put that out there and solicit some support for down the road.
Yeah, unfortunately, Kara is not, the river keeper is no longer on the line.
Right.
Have you reached out personally to talk to her? I would recommend doing that. You have her email address, right?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't know if Victoria could share that with her, and I'll be glad to reach out to her. But we just did this week, in fact, Tuesday night, so I haven't gotten very far with it yet.
Yeah, I'll definitely make sure Kara knows about this, and she'll probably watch the rest of this presentation to see what questions y'all had and what we talked about. So we'll make sure she's made aware of it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, trees are my favorite stormwater management practice. They're relatively low expense and they provide so many other benefits that there's nothing else, in my opinion, that comes close to trees for helping manage stormwater runoff. So one of the benefits, like you say, is preventing erosion.
Yeah, thank you.
If anyone thinks of any questions, after we hang up today, feel free to email us. Susan's email is susan@coastal.edu. And if you can, no one asked a stump question, did they, Susan? Were you able to...
Well, Jennifer led off with that.
Oh,
Jen
that's
did.
true.
Yeah. Where's the rafts of hyacinth come from?
So she gets the prize, I guess?
Yeah, right off the bat, I couldn't answer the first question.
I can ask you the other question I get asked several times. I've been asked this, while I've been sampling. People say, what can I plant in my yard to soak up floodwaters? And I have gone with trees. I tell people to plant cypress trees in their yards. So I don't know if they're going to do it, but I don't know what else to tell them. And then I think, well, at the point of needing to soak up floodwaters, then maybe you just need to move. But so that's a common one I get to. And then, house the water is, of course, the most common one.
Yeah, I also answer the bald cypress mostly because they have the biggest water withdrawal rate. Might as well get the most bang for the buck. But, probably any plant that can tolerate wet feet it is a good thing rather than nothing.
Now, the bald cypress, doesn't it take a long time to have major growth? Isn't it extremely slow grower?
Yeah, which could be a good thing.
Yeah, okay.
Having been in my house almost 30 years now, it's like an overgrown. I didn't keep up with managing things, and I thought bigger was better, and not always with trees. Well, if there are no other questions, I really had a good time. Thank you very much for joining in. What Victoria and I were thinking, if these sessions are popular, that we would do them on a routine basis. So if questions pop up, keep track of them, because we could have more sessions in the future. Let your other water samplers know, we can move around the dates and the times to better fit schedules and increase turnout. So, just let us know.
Mhm. And let us know what else you'd like to see.
Yeah. Yeah, we're really interested in making sure we don't lose contact when we all have to operate in this COVID-like structure here. We're used to getting together as a group and seeing each other, and don't want to lose what we had there because we just physically can't be in the same place. So any ideas, let us know.
Well, we appreciate your being willing to chat informally. I think it's very nice. Thank you.
Oh, good. Well, I always enjoy talking about your data.
Mhm.
I'm very, very proud of what you guys have achieved. So I'm the first one at the website, tooling around, looking at the data. I love it.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
We'll be
you.
in touch soon and see you next month for the data
Okay.
conference.
Okay,
Thank you. Bye-bye.
thanks. Bye.
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 Woohoo!
Victoria, I don't have any experience saving a recording like this that's likely to be a very large file.
It's gonna save to my computer. It's on my end.
And then the question is, how would we make